on the way to a family reunion when my son softly said, "Dad, turn the car around." Now, my hands trembled on the wheel. "Why, son?" He replied, "Just please now." And there was something in his voice I hadn't heard since he was a boy. Fear. I didn't ask again. I made a U-turn on the back road, tires crunching gravel, and we headed into the silence. My name is Calvin Mercer. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever spent your whole life trusting someone, only to realize they were never protecting you? They were protecting themselves? We parked outside an old diner an hour later. My son, 17, but with the weight of 70 in his eyes, stared at the windshield. "They were going to hurt us, Dad," he whispered. I saw the text. I blinked. "Who?" He reached into his hoodie, pulled out a folded paper, and handed it to me like it burned. It was a printed message thread between my wife, her brother, and a man I only knew as Uncle Stan. But the words, they made my skin crawl. "Make sure Calvin brings the boy. He won't fight if the kid's there. He'll sign. He always signs. Gaslight him if he hesitates. We need control of the house by Monday." I sat there, heart hammering in my throat, staring at the diner's flickering sign. I'd been driving to what I thought was a reunion. They'd planned a confrontation. They wanted power of attorney over my name and control of everything I'd worked 40 years to build. My wife knew. She was in on it. And my son, he was the only one who chose me. We drove home in silence. The next morning, I smiled at my wife like nothing had happened, kissed her cheek, made her coffee, because that's when I realized, if they were planning to bury me quietly, I'd make sure they knew what it felt like to be forgotten. I began noticing the silences first. The way the house felt colder, not in temperature, but in tone. She'd hum in the kitchen before, now it was quiet, calculated. Like even her movements had an agenda. I didn't confront her. Instead, I listened. At night, I'd pretend to sleep while she murmured on the phone in the bathroom, door barely cracked. Names floated out. Daryl. Stan. Escrow. I started taking long walks in the morning. She thought I was gardening. I was meeting with a lawyer. My name wasn't on the will. Not the revised one she filed 6 weeks ago without my signature. And the medical release? She'd already submitted paperwork declaring me in early cognitive decline, a lie. One she dressed in doctor visits I never had, symptoms I never showed. She was building a case, preparing for a time when I couldn't speak for myself. My son and I became partners in quiet. He watched her too, slipped me her planner when she wasn't looking, and tucked a burner phone under the floorboards in the guest room, just in case. The deeper I looked, the more I saw. She'd taken loans under my name, forged my initials on investment withdrawals. Even the backyard renovation, a $68,000 lien I never approved. The woman I married was gone. Or maybe she was never real at all. She smiled sweeter, touched my arm more often. She sensed the shift, but not the reason. And I kept playing the role, the forgetful husband, the harmless fool. Because I'd learned something valuable from her betrayal. The best manipulation is the one no one sees coming. One night, I stood alone in the garage, staring at the dusty boxes labeled dad stuff. Photos, journals, the deed to the land I bought before she ever knew me. And I realized they hadn't just wanted to erase my name. They tried to rewrite my legacy. That's when I made the call. Not to a lawyer, not to the bank, to the one person who knew the land better than I did. A name she never expected to come back into the picture. His name was Earl Whitmore. He showed up 2 days later in a mud-splattered Chevy, boots thudding on our driveway like truth arriving late but loud. Earl had been my foreman back when I owned the Dakota Creek property, 42 acres of raw, untouched land I bought before the kids were born. Nobody knew it still existed. I'd paid it off in cash, kept the title buried in a fireproof box under old tax returns. She always said it was too rural to be worth anything. Funny. Developers now called it prime country estate potential. Earl hadn't aged a day. Still wore his loyalty like denim, plain, rugged, impossible to tear. You sure you want to move it all? He asked. I nodded. Everything. Within a week, every asset with my name quietly shifted. Stocks moved. Accounts redirected. The land was subdivided, half into a conservation trust, half into my son's name. He wouldn't touch it, not yet. But it was his. Meanwhile, I handed Earl a key. A plain brass thing. To what? He asked. I smiled. My legacy. I'm just letting them believe it's still here. Back at the house, she was planning another family dinner. This time, she invited a notary. Said it was a simple signature. Something to protect us all. I sat at the table with her brother grinning beside her, documents stacked like folded lies. She wore pearls. Called me honey like it meant something. The moment I picked up the pen, I looked her dead in the eye. You know what I miss most? I asked. The sound of real love. The kind that doesn't need paperwork. Her smile twitched. And I signed, deliberately, 1 inch to the left of the box. Invalid. They didn't even notice. Yet. That night, I walked through the guest room, dusted off my son's burner phone, and made one more call to a woman who'd once warned me about my wife before she was silenced. She'd moved to Idaho, changed her name, but I remembered the kindness in her voice, and I needed the truth she'd buried to resurface. Marlene once worked for us. She was the caretaker when my mother-in-law was dying. Quiet woman, sharp eyes, too observant for my wife's liking. One day she vanished, no notice, no goodbye. Now I knew why. Calvin, she said on the line, her voice careful, but not afraid. It's been a while. I need the truth, I told her. Everything you weren't allowed to say back then. There was a pause. Then a sigh, long and heavy, like she'd been waiting for this call for years. I saw the papers, Calvin. Back then, when you were out of town, she made your mother-in-law sign everything over. She was sedated, couldn't even hold a fork, but they made her hold a pen. I gripped the phone tighter. And the money? I asked. Gone before she passed. Transferred to an offshore account under your wife's maiden name. My stomach clenched. That inheritance wasn't just sentimental. It was supposed to pay for our son's college. He ended up on scholarships and part-time jobs, while she remodeled the kitchen. I thanked Marlene, asked if I could send her anything. She only said, just don't let her win. And I wouldn't. The next week, I invited my wife to lunch. Just us. I brought her to a quaint place we'd gone to during our engagement. She seemed touched. Relaxed. Cal, she said sweetly, you've been acting different lately. I nodded. Been doing some thinking. Then I reached into my jacket and placed a small envelope between us. What's this? She asked. A gift, I said. Inside were black and white photocopies, deed transfers, text screenshots, bank notifications. Nothing original. Nothing illegal. Just enough to show her. I knew. Her hand trembled slightly, and I leaned forward, voice calm. I won't confront you again. Not directly. You'll never know where it's coming from, or when. But just know, every smile for me going forward means something is already gone. She blinked, tried to smile, failed. As we left, I held the door open for her, like a gentleman, because the next one I closed wouldn't open again. 3 weeks later, I watched her fumble with the wall safe behind the linen closet. She thought I was in the garden. I wasn't. She spun the dial with shaking fingers, pulled open the steel door, and stood still for a full 10 seconds. Then the gas came. The documents? Gone. The gold coins her father gave her to hide for emergencies? Gone. The birth certificates she'd quietly amended to shift my estate? All gone. She called her brother, panicked. I don't understand, she whispered. They were just here. Of course they weren't. I'd removed them days ago, left only a single note tucked inside the safe. The locks aren't the only thing that changed. Calvin. I never confronted her. That wasn't the point. This wasn't about arguments anymore. This was about erosion. A gentle wash of consequences, invisible at first, until the structure gave way. She grew nervous, watched me constantly, like I'd been replaced with someone sharper, quieter, less forgiving. She started overcompensating, packing lunches, folding my sweaters, laughing too loud at things I hadn't said. But her hands never stopped trembling. Meanwhile, I visited the nursing home where her uncle now lived, the one she'd once tried to put me in. I didn't speak to him. I spoke to the administrator. Just reviewing the insurance connections, I smiled. I believe my name's been used as co-signer. Turns out, it had. I removed it that day. She received the overdue bill in the mail the following Friday, $8,400. Due immediately. She asked if I'd seen it. I told her the mailbox hadn't come yet. The joy was gone from her eyes. She wasn't afraid of confrontation. She was afraid of my calm. Afraid I'd become immune to her storms. And quietly I had. My son saw it too. He started whistling again, sleeping deeper. Sometimes he'd watch her and look at me, not with fear, but with understanding. He knew. She'd built a house of mirrors. And now every reflection looked like guilt. It started with the credit card. Declined at the grocery store. Then again at her salon. She came home flushed with frustration. "Something's wrong with the bank," she muttered. "Oh," I said, eyes never leaving my crossword. "That's strange." She spent the evening on hold, pacing the hallway like a caged animal. By morning, 3 of her accounts were frozen. Not closed. Just locked for review. Routine audits. Minor inconsistencies. All reported anonymously, of course. I'd spent weeks collecting the evidence. Subtle fraud, unreported assets, hidden transfers. I never intended to prosecute, only to pause the life she'd built on deceit. And the clock was ticking. My name is Calvin Mercer, not a fool, not a saint, but a man who's finally wide awake. She booked an appointment with a financial planner. He was new, young, smart, and handpicked by me. He told her, quite truthfully, that her financial standing had complications, red flags, missing authorizations, irregular spending. "You'll need your husband's full cooperation to move forward," he added kindly. She smiled. Of course. She hadn't had that in months. I began pulling out of her orbit entirely. No more shared errands. No more dinners out. When guests came by, I let her speak for both of us. People began to wonder if I was slipping. Good. Let them think that. The man they remembered had already disappeared, and the one who remained had no intention of playing nice. The tipping point came quietly. I removed my name from the house. Not illegally. I simply sold my half of the property to a family trust controlled by my son. She wouldn't notice until tax season, when the deductions failed to match. And when she did, the house she thought she owned would belong to someone who never called her mom again. That night, I stood at the threshold of our bedroom and watched her sleep. Once I might have wept. Now I only whispered almost there. Because the final piece, the poetic stroke, hadn't fallen yet. And when it did, it wouldn't just shake her world. It would erase her from mine. It arrived on a Tuesday. A thick envelope with silver lining, hand-delivered. She opened it at the kitchen table, eyes scanning the page, expression flickering between confusion and calculation. "What's this?" she asked. I sipped my tea. "A retirement ceremony. They're honoring me at the old firm." She blinked. "You didn't say anything." I shrugged. "Didn't think it'd interest you." She studied the embossed card again, the words "celebrating a legacy" glinting across the top. That word, legacy. It lingered in the air like smoke. She insisted on coming, dressed in navy blue, pearls tight against her throat. Like armor. The event was hosted at the city library, under soft lighting and cathedral ceilings. Familiar faces lined the room, some I hadn't seen in decades. Others I'd quietly invited for a reason. There were speeches, laughter, a slideshow of moments from my career, groundbreaking projects, charity work, even my time as a scout leader. But the last photo made her freeze. It was a picture of the Dakota Creek land, now a protected conservation site, soon to be renamed the Mercer Preserve. A plaque would be installed next month. Not in her name, not in our name, in mine and my son's. The applause was thunderous. She clapped too, but her hands barely touched. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Later, I watched her sip wine alone while people approached me with admiration, shaking my hand, calling me a good man, a quiet builder. She sat isolated in a room where her reflection was nowhere to be found. And that was the final play. No confrontation, no announcement, just absence. I gave her what she feared most, a world where she no longer had influence. No leverage, no narrative, only a seat at a table where no one asked for her voice. We drove home in silence. When we arrived, she turned to me and whispered, "I feel like I don't exist in your life anymore." I looked at her gently and said, "You don't." Then I stepped inside and left the door open behind me, but only for the wind. She left a month later. No suitcase, no goodbye, just a half-folded sweater on the chair and a note that read, "You win." But she was wrong. This wasn't a game. It was a reckoning. After she vanished, the house breathed again. The floors no longer creaked with tension. The photos on the walls, once staged for perfection, were replaced with real moments. Me and my son, fishing, smiling, building a fence by hand. Not for defense, but for peace. One morning he asked, "Do you miss her?" I paused. "Some nights," I said, "but I think I miss the idea of her more than the person." He nodded. "I get it." We didn't talk about her after that. Instead, we planted things. Lavender, tomatoes, truth. And slowly, the years I thought were lost began to return. Not loudly, just in quiet pockets of joy, the kind she never noticed. The mail stopped bringing surprises. The bank stopped calling. Even the silence, once terrifying, became something close to sacred. She tried to reach out once. A short email, unsigned. "I don't have anything left. Just wanted you to know." I didn't reply. Not out of bitterness, but because some ghosts don't deserve resurrection. Instead, I printed it, folded it, and placed it behind the plaque at the preserve, where the wind would touch it, but no one ever would. I'd spent years carrying the weight of a woman who saw my kindness as weakness. But in the end, all she taught me was how to cherish the parts of myself she tried to bury. Now, the sun rises on a house that finally feels like mine. My name's on every deed, every memory, every plan forward. No noise, no battles, just the echo of footsteps leaving and the peace that followed. You don't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes the loudest justice is walking away whole. And as I sit on the porch with coffee in hand, I smile quietly to myself, because the man they tried to erase rewrote the ending.